Joining us on episode 4 of the Off the Air podcast is a reporter and anchor at WCBS 880 in New York, also a WFUV Sports alum, Mack Rosenberg. Mack, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you guys.
Mack, how have you been doing lately? This pandemic hit pretty suddenly. It's changed a lot of people's work and certainly affected a lot of lives, but how's it treated you specifically?
Yeah, thankfully, work has been there for me still, which I'm, just very grateful for. At the beginning, I kind of was wondering what was going to happen. I mean, I'm not a staff employee. I'm considered freelance, but it was clear early on that we in the news media were considered essential. So that's that's thankful for that, definitely. Kind of working from home is, I've been getting used to that. Still different things to get used to, but just thankful to still have work.
Mack, I want to talk about the perspective from a news reporter and how that's different from most of us who have lived through this pandemic. Having a close-up view of it, reporting on it, now reporting on some of the more recent events in New York City, some of the protests. What has it been like to have a close-up view of sort of this massive shift that we've seen in society? Not to get so dramatic here at the beginning of at the outset, but having an eye on that, a little different from the rest of us. Yeah,
it's very unique. I mean, normally our radio station is on a weekday, it's bustling. You've got anchors, you've got producers, you've got writers, traffic people, sales people. I mean, there's a lot going on normally during the week. And for months now, it's been just dead. I mean, rightfully so. They wanted to minimize the amount of people in the radio station. We've had anchors start working from home, reporters working from home, producers at times, writers, all the writers are working from home. So yeah, that's been very unique. I have seen different things in the last few months, but for me, really, it's just been the interesting part was not really the aspect of the pandemic, so to speak, but once all these protests started happening, I think that was kind of a bigger moment for me personally, because wasn't really out in the field that much during the peak of the pandemic. I mean, I was kind of sitting here rolling on press conferences, can put together reports from home on it. So in a way, I was kind of shielded from that. And I didn't go out much at all, if at all, now that I can think of, to talk to people. But there came a time when it was like, all right, there's a bigger story now. These protests just like came in such a wave and took over for a couple of weeks. And so I was kind of excited to kind of get back out there. And I covered a protest down in Manhattan at Washington Square Park and ended up walking about 6 miles north with, these thousands of protesters. And this was kind of at the end of it, on the back end. I was doing a lot of in-house, in-studio reporting on, for the first few nights when we saw destruction, that you couldn't really imagine. All the looting that was happening was terrible to see. But I've always been someone who, as a journalist, I can really kind of disconnect from the personal, emotional aspect of it. And that's been very, very important for me to do. It's come a lot easier to me than I think it has to others. And, everyone does their own thing and reacts in their own way. Social media, I think, plays a lot into that. But it was still, I'd get home, I'd work, till maybe like 1 or 2 a.m. on those nights, just in studio, kind of monitoring, police radios and, the Citizen app was great, Snapchat, just of people posting videos of what they were seeing. And so I'm in this little booth, and at the same time, I can see everything that's happening. And so I'd get home and I'd be like, man, I really cannot believe what I'm seeing. I'd get up the next day and do it all over again. So I think the protests more so than the actual pandemic for me. I mean, I've was not, again, out during the height of the pandemic talking to people. have still live with my parents, and they're kind of in the higher risk category. So tried to stay out of reporting outside for a while there. But, once these protests started, it was kind of like, all right, sorry, mom and dad, I gotta do this, and obviously taking all the precautions.
You talked about personal experience with the protests and being able to get on the grounds. What was your experience like? You talked about the rioting and the looting that was mixed into the peaceful protests. What was your personal experience like reporting on all of that?
Yeah, I covered 2 protests at Washington Square Park, and it was energetic. It was they were very forceful with their message, and at the same time it was under control. And I think what I saw was we had this curfew that went into effect in New York City. I don't remember what day of the week it was. May have been like a Thursday night, and it was actually probably earlier in the week, and it ended up, it was 8 o'clock curfew. It was the night after Midtown was just looted to no end. I mean, it was, we had one of our reporters out there, from the early afternoon on into the night, and I was kind of monitoring his reports and hearing what he had to say, and then kind of putting together everything at the end of the night. And I mean, to hear, those stories, even though I wasn't there, was still emotional a little bit there. But then covering the protests at Washington Square Park, it was this moving train of people. And once they left Washington Square Park, and it's like, okay, where are they going to go next? Because there's nobody really, telling them where to go. And I think what we saw with those later protests was the police, which were such a big part of the reason that this was all happening, took a step back, and they were there. They got to be there to make sure nothing gets out of hand. But the curfew was over by that point. They lifted the curfew, and that kind of eased things, because telling the public that they got to be inside by a certain hour is just, I mean, while it may have been necessary to stop the looting, it was really touched a nerve with a lot of people who were not happy about it. A lot of the people who were, as they say, peacefully protesting and not looting, because most of those people, that's what they were doing. But the handful of people who decided to loot, that was, you're going to kind of have the punishment for everyone as a result of those actions of the small amount of people. So once the curfew was over and, things started to ease a little bit, we had these daily marches throughout the city. And the one that I covered, it was like there was a group of maybe 50 or 75 people on bicycles at the front of this protest. And they were leading the way. And then you'd have organizers in back, and then the cyclists would make a turn on a street, and we'd say, no, we're going to keep going. And there'd be a stoppage, and it would just be a little hectic. And then they'd end up going. And then there were multiple times when they decided to sit and take a knee in the middle of the street. Like, traffic was, they were blocking off traffic. It was kind of rolling street closures, and they were blocking everything off, and they decided to sit, and they would call out names of, Black people who had been killed at the hands of police officers. And, during those times, it's kind of my job to, I didn't, at first I was not sitting. I was kind of taking video and tweeting it out as best I could. And this is in between doing live reports, every half hour or so on WCBS. And there was one point where everyone took a knee, and I was kind of like the only person not sitting, because, I'm a journalist. I'm not protesting. I am covering a protest, and that needs to be distinguished here. And there was a moment where they took a knee, and this woman turned to me and said, "Take a knee," and, at first I kind of gave her a little bit of pushback, because again, it's my job to be communicating to the public what these people are doing. It's not my job to be joining in with them. I'm not fighting for any cause. I'm reporting the facts of what I'm seeing in front of me and what people are saying. But I basically, I decided that I was going to have to do this. I was going to have to sit down and take a knee, and I did. And I it was fine. I had no problem at all to do it. But I guess I wanted her to know, even if I'm going to do this, just know that I am, here to cover this. I'm here to report what I'm seeing. So, you know, you had those moments, and it was a really good learning experience for me, I think.
Mac, when you talk about neutrality and keeping an impartial perspective, how important is that? I know you mentioned it earlier, and how do you cultivate that? How do you make sure that you find yourself in the middle of something that has become very strained and very politicized, and your job as a journalist to stay impartial? How did you develop that skill?
It's incredibly important. It is the first thing that I think of when I'm about to write a story, when I'm about to deliver a story. It's at the forefront every single day. You know, there isn't always another side to a story. You know, I mean, you know, we have certain rules in you know, as to how to report things, and you know, in this case, I was reporting on one side, you know, but at the same time, where are the police in all this? You know, because there were clashes with police and protesters throughout the week before that. So now it's like, okay, where are they? And I had only seen like 2 or 3 police officers the entire day. So you know, I was thinking like, okay, not just going to talk about the protesters, even though that is the story. Keep it with them first, and then say, by the way, minimal police presence. You know, I saw a couple of officers walking with the protesters, whatever it is. So that, you know, in that case, you know, you know what the main story is. But that is something that I've carried with me really ever since my my first job in local news. I was an assignment editor at a local TV news station, Fios One News, here in the tri-state area. It's no longer around, but you know, that was talk about learning experience. I mean, before you get on the air, before you can, you know, get to a story and, you know, put your voice to something, it's really important to know what you are saying and to know what the words are that are coming out of your mouth, and people are listening. You know, you are looking into a camera, you're talking into a microphone, you know, you're not seeing the person there that's watching you or listening, but they are there. And that is incredibly, incredibly important to know. You know, you balance that nervousness, and, you know, I could tell you that, you know, if I had like even 10 or 20 people looking at me every time I reported a story, like in the studio or, you know, at the scene with me, and people have looked at me, you know, but I try to, you know, stay focused. I might be even more nervous than I was if there was nobody there, but you know that they are there. So yeah, I think being an assignment editor and kind of, you know, just a very quick synopsis of that job was to find stories, breaking news, whatever kind of story it was, and give them to reporters to go do and schedule interviews and do that. And so learning to go through that process taught me that, okay, there's going to be another side here. You need to reach out to that politician or, you know, that victim or whoever it was to see if they have anything to say. And if they don't, that's fine. You know, it's not, you know, you don't have to talk to us, but it's my job to ask you if you have something to say. And we say, you know, no comment, or we reached out and they would rather not say anything. So it can be that simple. And then as far as, you know, on the protests, it's just seeing all the different sides that are there.
Mac, I'm happy you went down that road of kind of the journalistic values, because you graduated Fordham in 2014, WFUV alum. How much did your education there kind of instill those values before you even got out and took your first job?
Well, I got my first job in local news at Fios because of a professor who I had at Fordham, Lynn Garlick, who don't believe is at Fordham anymore, but she was I believe she was a producer at CBS News, longtime producer there, and she taught a class called Writing for Television and Radio News. And that is where I really got my experience into, you know, the window into how news works, local, national, whatever it is. So that was huge. Another figure for me at Fordham who continues to be a mentor to this day is Beth Noble, who I'm sure you guys know, or at least some of you know, who is a fixture in in the communications department and is, a huge presence for me. Someone who, I didn't actually meet her, I don't think, until I was a junior. And I took a journalism class with her. And, the class was kind of writing for the newspaper, the Ram newspaper, but it's, we would see each other outside of the classroom and talk about different things and email and, and so, it's those relationships. And obviously I know we're going to talk about Bob. Those are the kinds of, it's outside of the classroom, really. I mean, wasn't the greatest student, but, I did what I could. There were certain, I could have done better, I'm sure, in certain areas, but the experiences outside of that I got, the extra curricular opportunities at Fordham were huge and continue, for me to be huge to this day.
Well, since you mentioned Bob and WFUV, of course, doing 4 years there and making that the biggest part of your college extracurricular life, if you could start talking about FUV, what that meant and how it plays into you now reporting on the news, where the connection between sports and news is important for you.
Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to go to Fordham. I knew about WFUV. I knew, the heritage, Vin Scully and the rest of them. I knew all about it, but way before Fordham. I remember I was on the campus at Marist, visiting the campus with my parents, and, it was nice. It's on the Hudson River. It's beautiful. It's, take nothing away from it. But I walked out of there and I said to them, no, it's still Fordham. I knew from the get-go, and I'm so thankful that I did. And I can remember at some point before I even got accepted to Fordham, I did talk to Bob Ahrens on the phone. And I remember saying to myself, okay, this guy is pretty legit. He sounds like he's, an important guy that I should, keep on and make sure to develop some sort of connection with. And I think that, and I won't speak for anyone else, but for me, there were a lot of times at FUV from the beginning to the very end where I thought I was a little too big for my britches, if you will, and I you kind of take those experiences and learn from them. The earliest of those experiences I remember is on the phone with Bob, walking through campus. I had hosted, I did a rinky-dink football podcast with a friend of mine growing up. We did it for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun. And I said to myself, wow, okay, the fact that I already did this, I'm going to have a huge leg up. And I think I'm going to try to host the NFL podcast that they have, when I walk in the door, it'll. And so I remember talking to Bob about that and basically coming away from that phone call saying, okay, not quite yet. And, you also don't realize how much how the other people that are with you there and the experiences they come into this with, Mike Watts, DJ Sixsmith, Kenny Ducey, all those guys, they did a hell of a lot more than me in high school. So, and they were, younger than me coming in. So you kind of go into it. You don't know what to expect. You have that initial mindset, and then you kind of say, oh, okay, this is what this is really going to be about. I'm going to have to really, chart out the steps to get to where I want to get to. And it'll happen if the stars are aligned correctly. But, the entire way at Fordham, I wanted to be in sports. I never even thought about news. However, from the first day I got to Fordham, I was doing Fordham Nightly News. We had a nightly news program at Fordham, half hour. It was at I believe they called it the EIC, the Electronic Information Center, down in the basement of the library. And I did a screen test for sports and news. And I said, yeah, why not try news? I'd never really didn't have a clue about news, really, to be perfectly honest, at that point. And started doing Fordham Nightly News, and I did sports there as well. And so I had a kind of, sports was kind of the number one thing for me at FUV. And then that was kind of a nice little side hustle, if you will, throughout the 4 years, being able to do that. was kind of just, okay, dip your feet in a little bit there and see what happens. And then I got the job at FiOS after I'd worked at SNY for a few months as a production assistant, left there and got this full-time job at FiOS. Really took it because it was full-time. Full-time, it's right around the corner from home. I'm just going to take it. Didn't know a thing, not a lick about local news. And at the same time, I decided to reach out to George Bedarky, the news director at FUV, just to say, hey, I'm not sure what the possibility is, but I did Fordham Nightly News all 4 years. If you ever need someone to, do a fill-in newscast, I'd like to try it, And I had, George and I were fairly close throughout the 4 years. We'd gotten to know the news people very, very well at FUV. And I ended up doing a few early morning newscasts at FUV. And that was the first time on the air in New York doing news. And no one was really there to critique me. I had the little experience at FiOS, just the window into what local news was. And so that eventually led to everything, as far as being on air doing news. As far as the connection between sports and news, something I was thinking about recently, because really you are just telling a story. That's in both, whether it's a story of, Ryan Mara just getting drafted into the MLS or, a person who, just got kidnapped or, there was, I'm just trying to think of a story I did about a guy who actually witnessed a girl almost getting kidnapped. And so you're really just, telling the story of somebody or something in different ways, different ways of doing it. But, when it comes down to it, you still have to get the facts right. You still have to kind of craft it and make it your own in that way. And so that was kind of, that part of it was pretty seamless for me. The sports to news storytelling was seamless.
You talked about some of those key figures at Fordham, Mike, DJ, Kenny, you name it, who kind of everyone pushed each other to achieve their best. Are there any fond memories that come to mind from your time at Fordham where maybe you traveled together, or a favorite moment that comes to mind from your 4 years there?
Well, actually, in preparing a little bit for this interview, I made a list on my phone. If you don't mind, I'm just going to pull this out because there are so many. I mean, there are so many that aren't even on this list. I should also mention Eric Malo and Nolan Silbernagel as two of my absolute best friends who, to this day, are still best friends. Jake Kringschreifels as well. So many other people, Chris Marasco, Alex Smith. I mean, there are just so many people that you got to be friends with. And this is something that I say a lot when I'm asked about my time at FUV. Yeah, the play-by-play, one-on-one, all that stuff was, fantastic experience. But the people you share it with, I mean, the camaraderie, I've heard, the other interviews you guys have done, and that's a huge theme at FUV. So, I mean, let's see. This is not a road trip, but Bob Wolf came in to do a workshop once, passed away a few years ago, obviously the legendary broadcaster. And there was a moment where he called me up to do a mock call of a touchdown or something. And, I think that there was some moment in there that people still refer to of him telling me to call a touchdown. I don't remember exactly how it went, but that was something I remember. And then after that, Bob Wolf had told the people in the workshop, he was looking for someone to help him archive all of his stuff, and he would pay someone to do it. And so I'm like, wow, chance to work with Bob Wolf, whatever capacity. And so I put my name up. We had a couple of interviews with Bob, and he ended up calling me one day. It was in the middle of an 8-10 tournament, baseball tournament game. The 8-10 tournament was at Fordham that year, and I was doing some games. He called me and he said, listen, you'd be great for this, but this is, you really should be focusing on on your work at FUV and calling games and stuff like that. And that to me was like a moment where someone's, this person's looking out for me, even though they're not going to take me on for that person knows that time with them, as great as it might be, and as much as I might enjoy it, time with them might take away from, doing games and growing my craft that way. So that was a moment that I remember. Fordham baseball game, I believe Mike Watts and I were calling the game. There was a rain delay, a huge rain delay. This actually might have been that same year with the 8-10. I can't remember. Huge rain delay. And I'm sure if you guys have called a baseball game, that during rain delays, the players will go out on the field and they'll, do all these funny things. They'll do like human bowling. Well, they'll have the guys stand up as pins and they'll roll over and knock, whatever, do crazy stuff like that. And so there was a point where Mike Watts and I ran out onto the field, polos, khakis, and everything, and we started doing we just dove, and onto the water and would just slide for 20 or 30 feet. And we did that. We got all the nurdles all over us, from the turf. Bob found out about that, and I think he probably said, we walked in the next day, and I think he said probably something to the effect of, well. That was, you just, it happened, Bob. Yeah. And, whatever. The beat reporting was a great time. I did struggle to try and integrate myself into the core of people covering the teams. Cause you're a college kid. These guys do it for a living every day. And there was a moment, it was training camp of the summer of 2011 with the Giants, and my first day, and I knew that I wanted to ask Tom Coughlin a question, and I decided to ask him about an offensive lineman named Will Beatty. And so I just asked him, if he could talk about his progress, and Tom Coughlin's response to me was, is this your first day here? We've been talking about Will Beatty for months. And then he did answer the question, gave a little one-liner, whatever, coach speak. And I think some of the press guys did kind of give me a pat on the back after that, which was nice. So that was fun. Yeah, I mean, just, the people, I can't really hammer that home enough. Just, the guys and doing one-on-one and everything. I mean, there's just so much that happened over that course of time that you remember, and at sometimes you want to be back in those moments.
When you talk about being in a, whether it's a locker room or a clubhouse, and I think we can all relate to the initial, you're a little timid and you're the college kid among a group of professionals on the beat. How important is it that, because Mike Watts actually referred to it as something that just built his confidence when he actually stepped into the professionals. Was that something that kind of took a little bit of the pressure off your shoulders when you started your professional career, is having that exposure to such a professional environment as someone who's doesn't really feel yet like a full professional?
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember him, I listened to Mike, and yeah, that was huge. I covered the Yankees and the Mets, Giants and Jets, kind of like a little bit of everything over those 4 years. And yeah, you know, when you get out of college and you find yourself back in that situation, even if it's, a press conference with the mayor, it's not sports, but it's still, a press conference that's, you can compare to that. I do still get a little nervous tick. And I think in a way it's a good thing when I ask a question, as I know that I want to ask a question and I want to ask it, I know exactly what I want to say. And, I don't know, for me, I do still get a little bit of that, just knowing that you are actually conversing with this person, and that is the key. You're really just, you have to think of it that way. You can't think of it as cameras are on me and everyone's listening to me, and, every syllable out of my mouth could get me fired or whatever. That's not a recipe for success in that area. So, I can remember a moment of where I guess you could say I had a little guts in me to be able to do this. The Yankees had just gotten clobbered by the Houston Astros, and Astros were just terrible at this point. They came into Yankee Stadium and beat them up one game. And after the game, I went up to Vernon Wells and just asked him if he would have a few minutes to talk to me, and he did. It was very nice. And I guess I wasn't really thinking like, hey, they just lost by like 8 runs to the Astros. Maybe talk to him tomorrow. Maybe pregame tomorrow he'll have forgotten about tonight's game. And so, those kind of things over the years, you think, okay, this person is not like a robot. He's a human being and he has feelings. So, try to be on that side of it. And I think over the years, you start to get that mindset a little bit more.
Best piece of advice you've received from Bob Ahrens?
So, fall of senior year, this is 2013, we go to Temple football. And this was really at the height of the football program with Joe Moorhead. And it was probably the best game that I've been at live at Fordham. We won by a point. And I was doing color commentary. Mike Watts was on play-by-play. Eric Malo is our producer-engineer. DJ Sixsmith was on the sideline. And so we're in Lincoln Financial Field in the booth. And it's coming up on, I think the game was at 1. It's coming up on 4 o'clock. And the game is not, it's still, we know it's going to go past 4. And so I don't know if this still is the way it is at FUV, but if we had that 1 to 4 time slot locked in on Saturdays, whether it was one-on-one or a game or whatever. And after that, I'm pretty sure that no matter what was going on, FUV would take over with, I think it was mixed bag. And no matter what, we would have to go to the next program. We'd have to kind of come on the air and say, coming up, we're going to be switching gears to mixed bag. You can continue to listen to the game on WFUVsports.org. So Eric Malo hands me the card to say that, and I read it incorrectly. I butchered it. And this was one of those moments. Keep in mind, I'm a senior, so I've been doing this for 3 years already, where I thought I was kind of too big for my britches and like, okay, clearly there's a mistake here. I'm going to read it the way that I know it to be correct, which was incorrect. I was completely wrong. So I read it wrong once. Bob Ahrens gets in Eric Malo's ear back in the Bronx and says, give it to him again. He has to read that again. He gives it to me again. And I'm looking at Eric, like Fordham is like in the middle of a game-winning drive here. Like, just get away from me. We got to pay attention to the game. Now he had to give me the card again. I read it again, incorrect. So I think that happened. It may have happened a third time and then Bob is just fuming at this point. And eventually I did read it correctly. And the lesson that I got from that was just read the words that you are given. If they are not correct, they'll be corrected, but don't just, don't, just read the words, just read the words. And, yeah, that was a fun moment that we still laugh about.
and sticking on Bob, everyone sort of has their story or their word to describe him, and we hear about his passion and your first brush with him on the phone, maybe before you came in. What is it for you that makes Bob special, that makes his legacy at WFUV so big, so larger than life?
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things. I mean, first, the dedication to what the mission is. It was pretty clear to me in the beginning that, listen, this is not about seniority. This is not about, seniors don't necessarily get the best assignments. It's how good you are. That is what really, really is the factor. And, the seniority will come into play if there are 2 people. I remember Bob telling me this, 2 people who are just as talented. If one of them is a senior, one's a junior, you're going to give it to the senior. But ultimately, it's about the product. It's about what we are putting on the air in New York City. 50,000 watt station. This is not a college radio station. I was told that from day one. And so that's at the forefront for me. And, you know, another quick moment here. After my freshman year, I had planned to transfer. Actually, I had planned to leave Fordham and go to a Brooklyn college, strictly because of money. You know, we all know that Fordham is not cheap. And so it was that summer, 2011, and I registered for classes at Brooklyn. I, got my ID. I did everything I had to do. And I remember talking to Bob about that. And that was tough because, I had gone through the whole training program with FUV, and, Bob and I were getting closer at that point. And, he didn't try necessarily to stop me from leaving. He was honest with me, and that's not, he was not in it for personal gain, at all. He was in it for us, and if this was the best decision for me, he was going to respect that. And then I did my first newscast that summer, and I was like, I can't leave this, So that personal connection was so huge that you knew that, you could go into Keating basement at any time, go and walk into Bob's office and just sit down and talk to him, or just go on the computer. Or, he was always there. He was always there for us. So I think it's the combination of those two. And, the being honest part goes both ways. He was honest when he wanted to help you. And that a lot of the time meant telling it to you, like it was, and, read it the way that it has to be, the way that it's written, and telling you when you were not doing something right and correcting it in that way. So it all of those things for me stand out.
Mack, before we let you go, if there's one top quality that you would describe to a current FUV student in terms of the way forward for the station and the way to keep the standard where it's always been, what would that quality be?
Yeah, I think, if I could change one thing for my personal experience, let's call it like it is. We at FUV Sports were spoiled. I mean, this is an experience that nobody in the country gets in college. And so you're part of such a select group. And I wish that, and this is, not to blame anybody, but I wish that I had been able to tell myself during those years and leading up to graduation, you're not going to walk into a job just because of all this, even as unbelievable and unparalleled an experience as it was, you need to kind of have some humility here. And, humbleness about you going into the field. Don't just think because you have been at FUV and you have that name on your resume that you're going to just walk into something. And it was very, very true. I struggled to come to grips with that even after I graduated. I would ask myself, like, why isn't this happening yet? And, there's no answer to that. But, I would just tell people to stay grounded in what they do, stay humble, and just, keep going after it, and don't let up, don't let up the standard. And there needs to be an understanding of the value of this, there have been changes since 2014, with Bobby C coming in, carrying on this legacy. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Bobby is keeping the alumni in it. This podcast is a perfect example, because this can help folks. It can help people that don't even go to Fordham, that don't, that are at other programs that want to hear about it, because, it can stretch beyond that. So yeah, all of that.
Well, Mack, we really appreciate you taking the time, coming on, sharing all that insight, and all the best moving forward.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so
really
much.
Appreciate it. Good talking to you.
Thanks, Mack. You too.